is the new 2024 Ultra Retina XDR Tandem OLED M4 10-core 1TB iPad Pro that's so thin it's almost two-dimensional. And I'm returning it. I might consider upgrading to a different model, but definitely not now for one very important reason that really caught me off guard. It might be fixed depending on when you watch this, so I'll come back to this later, but for now, when that fix does happen, which iPad will I maybe replace this one with? And most importantly, which one should you get if you're considering upgrading or jumping into the world of digital art? Well, after doing a ton of research, I had a bit of a weird epiphany, and I actually recommend starting here when making the decision. Or actually here. Let me explain. While making and poring over spreadsheets, web pages, and flowcharts for the past few weeks, I had an unexpected realization that actually a good way to start in picking which model to get is to follow the pencils. Because although there are dozens of different iPad models and specs to choose from, there are only 4 Apple Pencils to pick from, which in and of itself is actually a bit confusing because the various pencils aren't universally compatible with every single iPad, and created the need for this little rubric to understand which pencil or pencils work with which iPad. Confused? Don't worry, we'll sift through all of this. If we dive into each of the 4 pencils in the lineup, I think it can really help to narrow down the selection of iPads for a couple of reasons. Real quick though, I do need to mention that these are just my speculations based on the research I've been doing. I don't have any inside information about Apple's plans, wish I did, so take any extrapolation that I make or mention with a pinch of salt. So, reason number 1. If you're interested in using your iPad for art, you've probably already assumed that you're going to get the pencil because it really does make for a wonderful drawing experience. Number 2, because these fancy styluses aren't cheap, ranging from $79 to $129, I know at least I'd like to get the most bang for the buck in terms of the features that are supported and hopefully getting one now that'll be compatible with a future iPad so I can keep using it even if I upgrade the iPad itself. With these 2 guiding ideas, let's start with the USB-C Apple Pencil that they announced just last year. It's the cheapest one at $79 and sounds like a great place to start, right? I mean, of all the pencils, it's the most compatible with the current lineup of iPads, which sounds great, but, and this is a very big but, if we dig into the features list, it's missing a crucial feature for digital art, which is pressure sensitivity. You know how with a regular pencil, or even a mechanical one like one of these, you can push harder to get a darker line or a thicker line? Most styluses for digital art, like the Apple Pencil, try to replicate this feature so that when you press harder, different things can happen. The width of a line can change, you can make it darker or lighter, even the color can be set to be affected by the pressure. So this is a huge part of Procreate and frankly any digital art tool. So missing out on this would be a pretty significant loss. Next up, we have the original Apple Pencil, the Generation 1. It's easy to identify because it's got this metal band at the end and has this cap that's spectacularly easy to lose. This one's $99, and the good news here is that we get that wonderful pressure sensitivity. So yay. But here's the bad news. It's the first Apple Pencil that was released back in 2015, and of the current lineup, it's only compatible with the base iPad. Not the Air or the Pro, or even the Mini, which we'll get to in a sec. So it's nearly 10 years old and is only compatible with one iPad in the current lineup that itself is 2 years old and has some internals like the chip that are 4 years old. So while this is a perfectly reasonable option and is the lowest cost, you'd still be spending at least around $500 to $650 for both the iPad and the Apple Pencil. Then, if you decide to upgrade to a different iPad in the future, there's a good chance that you'll probably have to buy another pencil. Next in line is where things really get interesting because we have both the Apple Pencil Generation 2 and the brand new Apple Pencil Pro, both sitting at the exact same price point of $129. And remember, the new Pencil Pro has the same form factor, and it does more. It has the squeeze feature, the rotation, the haptics, all at the very same price. Now, again, I'm totally speculating here, but to me, offering both of these at the same price point seems like a pretty clear indication that the Apple Pencil Pro is intended to replace the Generation 2 Apple Pencil. Want to know what else supports this? The fact that the Generation 2 Apple Pencil isn't compatible with either of the newest devices that were just released, the Air or the Pro. And that base iPad we talked about before that was released 2 years ago, it's not even compatible with that. In the current lineup, we have to go back to the iPad mini that was released in 2021, or we move to the very capable previous generations of devices like the M1 and M2 iPad Pros. So if you opt to go with the used device, or can still find a new M1 or M2 iPad Pro, I think those are totally great options that are very, very capable devices. Just remember the trade-off that you're losing a few features with the Generation 2 Apple Pencil for the exact same price. And if you want to upgrade in the future, the way it's looking, you'll probably have to buy a pencil again. Which brings us to the new Pencil Pro. Again, frustratingly, if you want to go with this option, it doesn't work with any old devices, like none of them. So if you want to go with the Pencil Pro, you have to get either the newest iPad Air or the new iPad Pro. Apple says this is because they moved the cameras on the iPad, so the magnetic charging had to be re-engineered, but it just feels like rather than trying to make an already thin device the tiniest bit thinner, perhaps they could have put a little bit of that brain power into building a lineup with a lot more cross compatibility. Which brings us to picking an iPad. If you're going with the Apple Pencil Pro because of the cool features that it supports, like rotation, which is the entire reason I considered upgrading to begin with, you basically have two options. You have the new iPad Air and the iPad Pro. To decide between these two, let's talk through 4 points to consider. Starting with number 1, price. This might be the only factor you need to think about because these devices are getting ridiculously expensive. It's absolutely insane to me that the most expensive iPad is now over $3,000 fully spec'd out. That's nuts. Stepping out of the world of the preposterous, the iPad Air starts at $599, while the Pro starts at $999. And remember, we still have to factor in the pencil. So if you're looking for the most economical option, then you may already have your winner. And let me just say, I think the new iPad Airs are actually great options. They're very capable. Moving on to the second point, if you have some more price flexibility, next I'd consider the size of the device that you need. And the best way to think about this is, how do you plan to use it? Will you be carrying it around with you everywhere you go, so having something smaller would be more convenient and more practical? Or do you value having the biggest canvas possible upon which to create your next masterpiece? As for me, I tend to use my iPad mainly at home and carry a laptop around for work and productivity, so I prefer to have the larger screen to work and draw on when I'm at home. The third consideration is the memory or the capacity that comes with the device. This, again, depends on how you plan to use it. Will you be using it for drawing, but also want to download a bunch of movies and music and have a large photo library on there, stuff like that? Things like this can really expand your memory needs, so I usually recommend 256 or 512 gigabyte versions if possible. If you do put a lot of media on your device, like movies and stuff like that, 512 gigabytes would likely be a comfortable option, saving you from constantly having to delete files and unload apps and things like that. If it helps to compare with my use as a baseline, I've used around 180 gigabytes on my current iPad. That's an M1 iPad Pro, and it has around 512 gigabytes of memory total, so I'm pretty comfortable that I still have quite a bit of room to grow into with that device. But before we move on to the fourth point, a quick note about the higher capacity iPad Pros. I generally consider 1 or 2 terabytes of memory to be pretty overkill for an iPad, unless you're a super power user or plan to load it up with a massive media library. Specifically with the iPad Pros though, if you upgrade to the 1 or 2 terabyte versions, you also get updated specs. You'll get double the amount of RAM, going from 8 gigabytes to 16 gigabytes. And you'll also get an improved version of the M4 chip that's in it, which might give you some boost in performance depending on what you're doing. For Procreate though, the most impactful difference is in the amount of RAM. Basically, the more RAM your device has, the more layers that you can use when drawing. There's still a total layer cap of 1000, but depending on how big of a canvas you start with, you'll have more flexibility having more RAM. The good news is that I think 8 gigabytes of RAM is plenty, and that's what you get with all of the iPad Airs and the lower capacity iPad Pros. For reference, the base iPad that we talked about with the first generation Apple Pencil, that has 4 gigabytes of RAM. So what does all this practically mean? Let's say you start out with a square 3000 by 3000 pixel canvas. If you're using the base iPad with 4 gigabytes of RAM, you'll have a maximum of 55 layers to work with. If you have one of the new iPad Airs or the lower capacity iPad Pros with 8 gigabytes of RAM, you'll get a maximum of 112 layers to work with for that same canvas size. If you now jump to the 1 or 2 terabyte versions of the iPad Pros with 16 gigabytes of RAM, you'll get 204 layers to work with for that same 3000 by 3000 pixel canvas that we started with. But remember, this doesn't apply to the 1 terabyte iPad Air. I know, it's fantastically confusing. It just applies to the Pros. You only get the additional RAM in the 1 and 2 terabyte iPad Pros. Which brings us to the final point to consider when picking out which iPad to get. How important are those additional features to you? Again, think about this in terms of what's important for you, not what the marketing hype says. Is the new Tandem OLED Ultra Retina XDR or whatever other hyperbolic words you want to append to the description of the screen, is it nice? Yes, absolutely. It's a wonderful screen, but will you be able to tell or even remember the difference in how dark the blacks are when you get home and it's the only thing you're looking at? Think about how important the screen is to you and how much you're willing to spend on it. There are other features that are different, like ProMotion, an included LiDAR camera, Touch ID versus Face ID to unlock the device, the number of speakers, the number and quality of the microphones, etc. If any of these are hugely important to you, then the iPad Pro may be the way to go. Just remember, you'll definitely be paying for these options. If you don't need all of the fancy bells and whistles, then the Air, in the admittedly ridiculous world of Apple pricing, is a good value. So, which iPad will I replace this one with? Honestly, I'm gonna have a hard think whether to upgrade at all after I take this one back. I'll probably stick with the Pro because I have a professional use case for the device. I teach classes, publish these videos, and create work for commissions and publications, stuff like that. I also did notice a surprising difference in the screens compared to my M1 iPad. Note that this is a specific issue with the Liquid Retina XDR screen technology that's on only the larger 12.9-inch M1 and M2 iPad Pros, and it's mostly visible when working against dark backgrounds, which I tend to do a lot. On the other hand, if you're just starting or looking to upgrade and want to take advantage of the new Apple Pencil Pro features, I think the 256 or the 512 gigabyte versions of the iPad Air are also great options that give you a ton of flexibility and room to grow. Then, if you opt to upgrade your iPad in the future, hopefully, and no one actually knows this for sure, this combo will give you the best chance of not having to buy another pencil again. But one final, super important point that I alluded to earlier, I don't recommend buying or upgrading right now because, as it turns out, the rotation feature, which was the one thing that got me to upgrade to begin with, isn't supported in Procreate yet. This was pretty disappointing since they literally included this in the launch event and didn't mention any delay that I caught. And again, maybe it'll be working by the time you watch this video, but check to be sure by looking up Procreate in the App Store and then check the latest version notes. As you can see here, at the time I'm recording this, The full Apple Pencil Pro features aren't supported yet. So that's why I'm taking this thing back, and I'll be waiting for that update. If you found this helpful, I've got even more detailed information to help you pick which iPad to get for Procreate at iPadforprocreate.com. You can also create some amazing art with my Procreate brush collections at blacklettershop.com. And I recently launched a massive video class about Blackletter calligraphy that you can find out more about at learnblackletter.com. For now, you can watch this video to get a bunch of tips about Procreate and learn a super important digital art concept. In the meantime, keep writing, keep playing, and I will see you next time.